One of the pieces of language from this week's Parsha talks about the woman's proactive role in conception. And there's an analogy between the woman and the Jewish people and how important it is and how meaningful it is to be sort of proactive in our relationship with our own Judaism and with the Jewish community, and the Schusterman Foundation certainly enables all of us to be able to do that. So I appreciate them being here and enabling us to have this opportunity. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about building a winning team. But as I said in my presentation earlier, we can make this a conversation. So if you want to stop me as I'm going through this, if you have a question as I'm going through it, we can take it in whatever direction is most helpful for all of you. And I apologize to some of those who were around earlier. There'll be a little bit that is repeated. But in terms of what we want to cover, we're going to talk about sort of what makes people productive, what makes people valuable, and why. What is your role as a manager, if you're in that position, or if you will be in that position, in really selecting for talent and developing a winning team? How do you ask the right questions, and what's really the secret to hiring the right people? To give you a little bit of background on who I am, I run a technology business based in the States, where we provide systems to try to get the right people and the right jobs together. We have a couple of sides to our business. On one side, we work with employers to help them take candidates who are applying to their jobs and identify those candidates who understands what the role is all about, who is qualified, and whose behaviors, whose personalities are most likely to succeed. On the other side of our business, we do some work at the university level, where we take students and we ask them what they're passionate about, what they've studied, what they want to do, where they want to go. We assess their strengths and weaknesses. We provide them with a little bit of feedback and coaching. Where are they going to be most successful? How can they interview most effectively? And then allow employers to search against that data. The idea being that we can widen the number of opportunities available to students, the number of students available to employers, and to increase the pool of employers recruiting at a particular university campus. And then we have a spin-off of that where we work with government to help take people who are out of work, who are unemployed or underemployed, to identify what they've done in the past, what they want to do in the future, where they want to go, allow employers to search that as a way to reduce the duration of unemployment and get people back to work more quickly and more effectively. So let's get started. So we have a number of principles that underlie the work that we do, and that underlie the philosophy and some of the science behind what we do. The first is that people don't want to fail, and either do organizations. But when they do fail, they're either going to fail because they don't know what to do, they don't know how to do it, they don't want to do it. We're going to make the assumption that usually organizations can assess for hard skill. They can tell whether someone has the hard criteria that are necessary for a job, but sometimes it's more complicated when it comes to other areas. The second principle is that you're going to do better and longer at things that you enjoy. Pretty basic, right? If I enjoy what I'm doing, I'm willing to do it for longer, and I'm probably going to sustain that over time. What we're really looking for in our business is to understand how personality, sort of who I am, intertwines with rewards and leads me to do what I do. Why is it that I'm doing this? What motivates me at the end of the day? And we really divide motivators into two different areas. There are intrinsic motivators, sort of who I am, and personality, and sort of how I'm built. And once you're 30, it's basically over. You sort of are who you are. Until that point, you're developing who you are. You're building on your experiences, and you're understanding where it is that you might go. The extrinsic motivators are divided into three areas. The first is material. Do I feel like I'm being treated fairly? Doesn't mean I have to get rich tomorrow, but it means that sort of relative to my peer group, do I feel like I'm being treated in a way that is fair? The second is social. Does what I'm doing make a difference? Does it make a difference within my organization? Does it make a difference within my community? When I'm out at drinks with my friends and I'm talking about what I'm doing, do I feel respected? Do I feel like that is valued and matters? And the third is this going somewhere? I can deal with a bad day, I can deal with a bad week, I can deal with a bad month, I might be able to deal with a bad year. As long as I know that this is really fundamentally moving towards something and somewhere that I ultimately want to be. So when we talk about defining work, in the United States, we've got lots of bureaucracy, and I said earlier, plenty of bureaucracy over here. This is how the government works to define work in the US. So you have all these different job definitions and categories and interest areas and skills and abilities. We think this is sort of unnecessary. We really think there are only 6 jobs. So if you think about anything you've ever done, if you think about any role that you've ever recruited for, you're doing one of these 6. in some level of importance. The first is leading people and leading others. That's about sort of establishing a vision, communicating that to others, and getting them on board. It's an entrepreneurial leader. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's sort of Obama in 2008. It's someone who can inspire a crowd. It's someone who can get them onto their side and motivate them in a significant way. And that's totally different than a manager. And oftentimes people will confuse a leader with a manager. If you're hiring for a manager, you don't want to hire a leader. A manager is someone who's figuring out who's doing what, where, and when, who's task-oriented, who's disciplined, who's thorough. Service can mean different things in different environments. As an attorney, I might provide service to my clients. Someone in the restaurant might be providing service to us. It's really about putting someone else first and subordinating sort of your needs to your clients. With sales is really about convincing others to do things in new ways. There's an ego drive element to sales. I have a high need to be liked, so I'm working to persuade you to understand where it is that I'm coming from and to get you onto my side. Working with data and information and analysis, and then working with equipment and tools. And working with equipment and tools can mean different things in different environments. It might be someone who's in a construction-oriented role, or it might be someone who's a scientist and who's in a lab. And then cutting across all of those areas are three competencies. The first is problem solving. Problem solving in our world refers to abstract reasoning. Or how do I take a concept off to the left and a concept off to the right, understand how those synthesize together, and allow me to draw a unique conclusion as a result. We have organization and time management, and then working on a team. Am I an individual contributor, or am I looking to coordinate my work and what I'm doing with others? And as a result of that, we can define any job within this matrix. So I can take any role you've ever recruited for, any role that you're looking to hire for, any role that you've ever had, understand how the competencies and the strengths are important, and we can define it here.
Are they mutually exclusive?
No, but there's usually, what we do is we have a forced ranking. So when we're working with an employer, we'll ask the employer, of these areas, what do you have to have in order to be able to do the job? Not that we want everyone in our organization to be service-oriented, but what do they really have to have? Then what would be nice to have, and then what doesn't matter. And of those first two areas, we'll ask the employer to rank them in a forced ranking. There are 10 different areas, and we'll ask them to force rank them, and then that'll allow us to measure match between a candidate and an employer. So they're not exclusive. The sixth principle is simple. It's just that we can measure these things. And to the extent that we can measure them, we can get better and better over time. So what we're really looking for is this intersection, where we take information on the left about the role. What's involved? How do we measure performance? What does the environment look like? And then on the right, information about the candidate, their skills, their ability, and their personality. And where you get the greatest intersection between the two, you're most likely to get the best outcome. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So this is an example of a senior executive at one of the largest beer companies in the world. And the blue ranges show the range of the people on the marketing team. And the red shows the executive scores, so sort of where they are. So if you look at the executive, this is ego drive, this is ego strength, urgency, cautiousness. So this is someone who's really urgent and who wants to get stuff done, but is not so cautious. It's sort of someone who's going to shoot and then sort of worry about ready and aim. And we have interpersonal skills. So this person is sort of low accommodation, high skepticism. They're not going to go out of their way in order to help someone else. And we can see what this looks like. So these are sort of abstract reasoning scores, organization. And overall, this is how the team rated the manager. So if you look at where this person was lowest, they're not very efficient. They're not well organized. But they're highest in terms of abstract reasoning and social scores. So I wanted to show you that because this person was hiring for someone who was going to be a vice president on their team. So the red is this person's scores over here, and then the black is the person who they were going to hire. So when you talk about hiring for a team that is functional and that works, you want to pay attention to both the things that come together and also the things that are different. So over here, you've got risk-taking. So you've got a manager who's really a high risk-taker, and you've got a subordinate who's a low risk-taker. You've got someone over here who's very helpful, and you've got someone over here who's very unhelpful. someone over here who's very skeptical, someone over here who's not. So you've got people who are fundamentally different and who are going to be put onto the same team. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's gap analysis. It sort of plays to someone else's weaknesses and fills a spot. In other situations, that might be a little bit of a problem. If I've got a really high need to do something urgently and the people on my team want to be really cautious about it, you're going to start to have some conflict. And so you got to pay attention to where those gaps are and to coach both sides. To coach the manager and to coach the new hire as to how they can be most effective in that environment. So the first things first is that you've got to define what the role is all about. And you got to define what the role is about as it relates to the specific things that need to get done. Oftentimes in organizations, we'll talk about values. We'll talk about what's important to us as an organization. And we want everyone to be team-oriented, or we want everyone to be service-oriented. But what matters first is whether or not they can do the job. If you're hiring a salesperson who's really team-oriented but can't sell, you've got a bigger problem than if you hire a salesperson who can sell. Number one, it might be a little bit less team-oriented. So the first thing that you want to focus on is what is the job really about? And then second, what are the specific measurements that you're going to use over time against that work and against those outcomes? And then, following that, you want to overlay the culture and the values and the gap analysis between where you are and where you want to be. Earlier, I talked about sort of interviews and the problem with interviews. Interviews are not really effective screening tools. They're used because that's sort of what we've always used. But it turns out they're really only about 14% accurate. And a study that was done a number of years ago found that we had these biases. We had these biases that we developed in the first 10 seconds of meeting someone. How articulate were they? What did they look like? How did they present themselves? And then we spend the next hour trying to confirm those biases, rather than really focusing on what's going to make the most importance in that hire, in that role, and then ultimately for that person as part of the team. So we have that sort of confirmation bias. The second thing that's often used in developing a team or making a hire are sort of puzzles or cases. So in the consulting space, a lot of times a prospective hire will be given a case. They'll be given something to work on, a particular problem, and then they're asked to talk a little bit about how they would solve that problem. In the technology world, Microsoft and Google were famous for asking these questions and these puzzles during an interview. So for example, you would be asked if you're shrunk to the size of a nickel of some currency and you're put inside of a blender, how do you get out? And they found that these questions really only served one purpose, which is to make the person doing the interview feel smart. And it turns out that that's not really helpful either, unless we're talking about sort of helping the interviewer's ego. And so a lot of things that were done as part of the screening and selection process really weren't all that helpful. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is you can implement performance-based assessments. You can give someone a chunk of work and an example of something that they would actually have to do on the job. Have them provide that to you, and then analyze that. That's going to be much more effective than an interview. The second thing are assessments, measurements of cognition or of intelligence. And all things being equal across every job, people who are smarter are going to perform better than people who are less smart. There are some problems around measuring that. In the US, we have some laws against providing adverse impact against certain groups that are protected. So there are some things that we have to work around and that we have to work with in certain jurisdictions. But to the extent that you can assess intelligence and you can assess personality as part of a comprehensive process, that's going to be helpful. And then using that to structure your questions and to structure your interviews. So instead of starting off with a random conversation that sort of just leads me to confirm my biases, you start off with specific data that you're then going to use to have a very specific conversation. So I want to show you a little bit about what we do in our business and how our assessments are structured. So what we'll do is we'll take a candidate and we'll ask the candidate first, in your ideal world, in your ideal role, what do you want to do most and what do you want to do least? And you'll recognize these areas because these are the areas that we sort of whittle down the world of jobs to. Those are the competencies that we have inside of our system, the 10 most important areas. And we're asking you, what do you want to do most? What do you want to do least in your ideal job? Going back to that early principle that people are going to do better and longer at things that they want to be doing. We're then going to ask you, what do you think you're good at? Give us an idea of your own self-assessment and self-confidence, but this is going to get underweighted relative to other sections that are not as self-assessed. We'll ask about your experience from none at all to more than 5 years, and then we sort of get into the core of the assessment. And someone asked in the last presentation, how do you prevent someone from faking the system, from just sort of telling you what you want to hear? So the trick is, in each group of 4, we're asking you what is most and least like you. So at the very top, we have 4 different traits. We have solitary, assertive, impulsive, consistent, or over here, industrious, accommodating, disorganized, unoriginal. And again, we have 2 positive and 2 negative. So what we're really doing is we're asking you, what is least like you? Disorganized or unoriginal? It's not clear which one's going to help. Right? I got to have my stuff together, and on the other hand, I got to be creative. And we'll do this lots of different times. So you see disorganized repeat here, here, and here. The underlying assessment tool has been run more than 3 million times with 25,000 different organizations. So the research behind it is very good and solid in terms of what it measures and how it works. And as a result, we're able to measure personality. So at the bottom here, we're measuring assertiveness, empathy, confidence, sociability, helpfulness, thoroughness, problem solving, and we're showing you what that looks like on a percentile basis. In this case, we're looking at it against the US population, and what we would do is we would norm it on a country-specific basis. So we know that the 50th percentile for assertiveness looks different in the US versus Latvia versus Israel. And so that person at the 50th percentile will be different, and it will be normed differently depending upon the country in which we're working. What we then do is we translate who I am. So this is sort of who I am to how that's going to impact my performance on the job in those 10 competency areas. So earlier we asked if they were mutually exclusive, and I said we set up that template. That's what you see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what the employer has said is most important to them. And that allows us to measure match in 4 areas. What the candidate wants to do, what they think of themselves, what they've done in the past, and then personality. And we weigh each of those, and as a result, we can come up with an overall score that allows us to rank a pool of candidates and identify those who are going to be the best fit. We'll uncover specific strengths and tell you what that means. So for example, if you scroll down to helpfulness, we would tell you that this applicant is likely to be perceived by others as being independent-minded, not likely to enjoy a service-oriented role. And then we'll suggest some questions to ask going into an interview. So again, this was someone who was low in helpfulness, so we might ask them about a time when they had to deal with a difficult colleague or client. What was the nature of the incident? How could they have done a different job? So this is about structuring the process so that the time is spent first with those who are going to be most successful, then uncovering their specific strengths, and then asking questions that are relevant to the particular individual that you have in front of you and to their particular areas of strength and weakness. So I want to give you a couple of examples. So a lot of times people say, that's interesting, but I'm really good at interviewing. And I can figure out all that stuff by spending an hour with the candidate. So the first thing is, that means you have to spend an hour to figure out you have the wrong candidate in front of you. And the second is, it's not usually true. So I wanted to give you an example. This is from one of the largest financial services companies in the US. And we were assessing their incoming summer intern class. And this was the #1 performing intern in the whole company. And it's a sales-oriented role. You can sort of see why. So this is assertiveness, confidence, sociability, energy, inflexibility, indirectness, ego drive. So you have someone who's outgoing, they're confident in their approach, but on the other hand, they have high inflexibility. What does that mean? It means they're kind of rigid. What does that also mean? It means they're going to follow the rules. Usually salespeople don't follow the rules. And this company had a process where if you sort of follow their system and you follow their rules, you'd be successful. So this guy combined the traits of a successful salesperson with that ability to follow through. #1 person in the country for this company, and you can see that translated into high scores in generating new business and entrepreneurial leadership. I wanted to show you that because they also hired this person. This person looks totally different, right? Low assertiveness, low confidence, low sociability, high thoroughness, high helpfulness, high problem solving, high cautiousness. This is an analyst. This is someone who will sit at a desk and work through lots of data. Why did they hire this person? They hired this person because using sort of the conventional metrics of the interview and the grades in the school, they looked the same. They had the same grades and they went to the same schools and they wanted to do the same job, but it turns out they were two totally different people. Because a lot of the processes that are used for screening don't ultimately select for who someone is, and that's so important to ultimately the outcomes on the job. So you can see low generating new business, lower entrepreneurial leadership, and this was a low performer. So you can start to use all of this data together. It's not that one thing is the silver bullet and solves all the problems. It's that by packaging these together, you can get to a better outcome over time. And you can use that to look at who you have on board today. You can model your existing team and say what makes for success. You want to look at data, and you want to look at data on a regular basis. And increasingly, data is more and more available. So you want to look at who applied, who'd you talk to, who'd you hire, and over time, who was successful and who wasn't. And to use that to create models that then inform what you're doing in terms of selection and what you're doing in terms of onboarding and coaching. And if you do that, what our clients have found is that you're able to reduce forced turnover for the number of people that you have to show the door to by 20 to 30%. You can increase organizational citizenship, how much people feel like they're part of the team. You're doing a better job of onboarding, and then you're working to improve that over time. And that organizational citizenship item is something that I also mentioned earlier. Sort of how much I feel like I'm part of the team. If I really feel like I'm part of the team, I'm more willing to go out of my way to help my colleagues and to help my friends, even though it's not part of my job. And I'm less likely to think about leaving. For every 1% increase in organizational citizenship, turnover will decrease by between 2 and 2.3%. There's a significant return to making the team feel more of a team. And this just shows you that rise over time. This was a client that was using the assessment data to improve that collaborative nature, to improve the orientation towards the company over time. We can skip through lots of that. I wanted to show you some examples in professional sports. So earlier today, someone said, do you do any studies where you look at who you assessed and who was hired and whether or not you're successful? Do you know whether or not this stuff is actually working? And I said, yes, we do look at that. We look at that with our clients. And with our clients, we can take a look at those people that were hired, and we can look at whether they stick around longer than they did before. We can look at whether they were more successful than they were before. But there's certain people that we will recommend against. And they may have gone down the street and gotten a job, and they were superstars, and we never knew it. So it turns out that professional teams will use some of the same underlying assessment data prior to selecting people during a draft. So if you're in professional sports, if you're in basketball or baseball, you'll have a draft. You'll decide who you're going to bring into your team. And then over time, those statistics are publicly available. So if I choose not to pick someone up and someone's at that level, they'll get picked up by another team, and we can look at that data. And so I wanted to show you what some of that looks like. And oftentimes, among top-tier athletes, it's really personality that will measure and determine how long and successful someone's career is. You'll have a Michael Jordan and you'll have a Tiger Woods. But among the average professional athlete, a lot of it has to do with personality. Am I willing to play through a bad time? Am I willing to play through a slump? Can I persevere? And so this is an example in basketball. So these are people that were recommended, and these are people that weren't recommended. And when you look at almost any statistic, it's 2 to 1, 3 to 1. Points, rebounds, blocks, steals, assists, minutes. It doesn't matter what metric you're looking at. If you're looking at those that were recommended versus those that aren't, there's a pretty significant difference there. And it's neat because it's something that we can't look at in the corporate world because we really don't have that counterfactual data. When you look at baseball, see the same thing. Basically a 2 to 1 ratio in terms of performance and how people did in terms of those that were recommended and those that weren't. One of the things I wanted to talk about is sort of the power of starting with the right questions. And Dr. Weinstein, who runs a lot of our research and who's helped in the development of a lot of these assessments, likes to talk about sort of judger versus learner questions. So on the one hand, we can ask all these sorts of questions. We can ask sort of, what's wrong? Who's to blame? How can I prove I'm right? The sort of questions that after the fact are very judgmental. Or we can ask questions from a learner standpoint. And these are all really looking at the same data, right? So we can look on the left at sort of what's wrong, or we can say what's working. We can look on the left and say, what did I have to lose, or what's useful about this? You can look at the same situation, and you can look at it from 2 points of view. And when you're a manager, and you're developing a team, and you're developing people, it's really, really important to start with the right questions. It's really important in life to start with the right questions. But here too, it really makes a huge difference in terms of developing people and making sure that your team feels like they're in an environment that is safe and that is one that they can learn from and that they can build upon. So when looking at sort of learner versus judgment, we see on the left, again, the type of activity, right? We're looking at judging versus critiquing. We're looking at reacting versus being reflective. We're looking at sort of knowing it all versus looking to learn. And it's really that open learner mindset that allows you to ask the right questions. And this is so important once you have the right people at the table. Right? It all starts with getting the right people at the table. If you have the wrong people, and you have the wrong attitude, and you have the wrong skills, it's not going to matter, because they're not going to work. You may have a nicer environment that keeps them around longer, but that's not really helpful either. It really starts with getting the right people, and then developing them in the best way possible. And in developing them, it's really about saying, how can we learn from this opportunity, and how can we move forward in the right way? And all of us have this tendency to judge. We do it every day. It's that 10-second bias when we're walking into an interview. But the question is, how can we proactively switch? How can we switch between the two? And oftentimes it just takes the energy and the effort to take a step back and to sort of ask the question, am I analyzing this? Am I approaching this in a way that is most productive? Am I getting what we really want out of the situation? And can we improve this? Can we get better? And so when you talk about sort of the secrets to hiring the right people, the first is really to be clear about what you want done. You've got to get that clear definition of the role and the criteria and what makes for success. If you can't define the role and you can't define the success, you shouldn't be making a hire. You've got to start with that. The second is saying, do they have the basic competencies that we need? Then, is there this match between who the person is and what the role and the organization are all about? And if there is, then you make a hire, and then you want to check in regularly. And when you're checking in regularly, we talk about doing that in several steps. The first thing is right off the bat. So off the bat, we want to define what makes for success, and we want to be clear internally and with that individual. As a new hire, as a new member of the team, you deserve to know how you're going to be measured and what success looks like, how you define that. You want to document what the expectations are at 90 days, 6 months, and a year. So those are good points to sort of check in and say, how are things going? You want to make sure that there's an open dialogue. From that learner standpoint, that the employee, that the team member feels comfortable coming to you and talking about things and being proactive, and that there's a mentor, that there's someone who's there to coach that person during their first 90 days and really throughout their first year. In 3 and 6 months, you want to check in. You want to make sure not only that you're checking in every day or every week and saying, hi, how are things going, but that there's a more formal opportunity to sit down and to review productivity, to review progress, to review satisfaction on both sides, and again, say what's working. And why is that great? You're doing such a good job. What is it about that piece of what you're doing that makes it different and that's amazing? And how can we incorporate more of that into the rest of the work? How's everyone benefiting? What do we need to do more of? And then what are we going to measure moving forward? So again, we said what we were going to measure up front. Do we need to change those measurements? Have the metrics changed as a result of the organization changing in any way? And then we check in again at month 12 after a year. And we're doing something very similar. We're saying sort of what's working and why, what are the criteria, and oftentimes we'll also have an opportunity for other people to be involved in the review process? How do those people around you feel about your performance? And where is their opportunity for growth? And so really it's about being clear. It's about getting everyone on the same page. It's so important to have definition and to be clear about what things mean, to make sure that there's regular communication and that people feel like they are really part of a team, like they're cared for, because that'll improve performance internally and it'll reduce turnover over time. About letting people know that what they're doing makes a difference. When we talked about those intrinsic and extrinsic motivators, it's important as a manager that you pay attention to all of those. That you pay attention first to making sure that this person's intrinsic motivators were aligned to the role, that they were the right person, and then that you're paying attention to those extrinsic motivators. Are they being treated fairly? Do they feel that way? Do they understand where this is going? Do they understand how what they're doing makes a difference? So when you look at these items, it's really about playing in to those motivators that we talked about earlier. And so that's really what makes for developing a winning team. And what we've learned in our own business and in our own work. And I'm certainly happy to talk about anything you guys would like. Have experience in the US of starting this, of building the organization where it is now, and now we're really getting ready to scale more significantly to build out our executive team. But I'm happy to talk about whatever you guys would like and answer any questions. Yes, sir.
I'm not sir, I'm just Zhenya.
Yeah.
So the simple question is, which is better? Just to take a blank page and to teach him to do the superstar out of him, or just to take the ready product and help him to sell it. For example, I'm speaking about the restaurant, and it's an issue, especially in Baltic states. I'm not saying only about Estonia, in Baltic states in general. The service mainly is horrible, not only because of the language knowledge, which is also an issue, but the way how the people behave during their services.
Right.
So sometimes if you take really a person who does not even know how to hold the tray and serve glasses, but he's such a nice, big words, nice human being, so any steak cooked not well done but medium rare, he can solve it all with his honesty and soul. Or you just take the machine who will push, sell, but there is no smile, there is no love coming out of it.
Right.
So which one's better?
Good question. So the question is sort of, do we weigh experience and having someone who has done it before and knows what to do?
But
but they don't have the personality. Or do we weigh sort of who someone is internally and weigh the personality if they don't have any of the experience? And my answer is that it probably depends on the nature of the role. So Zhenya was talking about the restaurant business. And in the restaurant business, in the Baltic states, that we have a problem with service orientation and hiring people who are really going to have that service orientation. And my answer is probably in the service industry, in the restaurant industry, what we hear in the United States is that it's a lot easier to train for the skills than it is to train someone to be a nice person. And so therefore what I would tell you is they have to have a basic level of ability. So for example, if they can't ever carry a tray, then they can't do the job. They have to have the physical ability to do what you need in the role. Now if they don't have the experience of having carried a tray, that's different. But if they have the physical ability to be trained to do that, that's okay. But they have to have that basic criteria. Once they have that basic criteria, I would say that you hire for personality and you hire for service orientation, because it's going to be a lot easier to train them to handle the tray and to be able to take the order than it will be to smile and to be nice when that's not who they are. So for many, many roles, particularly roles in the service industry, my recommendation would be you have to have a threshold level of skills, ability, raw ability. Then you hire for personality, and then you train for the rest. Because you're really going to be more able to teach someone how to hold a tray than you will be able to teach someone who's not nice to be nice. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes?
I have a question. Do you sell the franchise or the technology or only services? Because what you are telling right now, you have to be a human resource specialized, to know how to operate this. It's not for everybody. So how do you sell it?
So we try to make what we do really simple. So in our business, it's all delivered over the web, and it's pretty straightforward. So we asked Zhenya, what do you need most? Someone who can sell or someone who can provide service? Someone who can solve problems or someone who can work with equipment? And he ranks those, and then we use that data to measure how well matched the people are that are applying for his job. So we try to minimize, actually, the level of specialization that someone needs in order to be able to understand how to use the system. But it's all web-based, it's accessible online. For very small organizations, the manager will access it directly. For other organizations, the human resources professional may access it.
How many languages it localized?
So the underlying tool, I think, is localized in about 20 languages. Our company has used it in Japan, Panama, Mexico, Israel, and a few European countries. So we've localized it in those languages in terms of the platform overall.
You do the localization, or, for example, I want to use it, it's my own program, or you do?
We have people who are professionals in terms of the language implementation and localization. Sure.
So this sounds great for companies that have well-known needs and have well-frameworked understandings of job description or position. How do you deal with entrepreneurial companies that are in hypergrowth stages, where the folks who you're hiring for today's jobs might not be the people you need working in your company 2 or 3 years from now, but you don't necessarily only want to hire to your workforce?
Depends. And so the reason why I say it depends is that to some extent you want to hire people in an organization like that who are smart and who are flexible. But on the other hand, and we're sort of in this stage as an organization, you need to hire people who are experienced in order to come teach you what to do and to bring best practices to the table. And those people might be more specialized, they might be a little bit more senior. And I think that some of those people will grow with you, and you will overtake some of those people. Someone was telling me the other day about Netflix in the early days. And they had someone who sort of managed the fulfillment of the DVDs by mail. And that what they needed in the second stage of their growth was different than what they needed in the first stage of their growth. And then in many cases, that's not the same people. And sometimes you need to move on as an organization. And so I think what you want to do is you want to have a balance. If you're hyper-growth and you're hiring a lot of people, you probably want to hire some people who are going to be smart and flexible and who are going to be able to grow with you and who are sort of mid-career or earlier career. And then you want to hire some people who are more experienced and who can bring that to the table. And then over time, you're going to have to rebalance on a regular basis, and you're going to have to readjust based upon where you are. What else?
The development tool that you described, does it also work for the when you have a global team? We don't see that, and they're in different times on different continents. How would you still maintain that team spirit when you have guys one in Singapore, another in US, and the only hour you have to talk to them is one. It's very hard. I mean, you don't even see that. You don't know what they do.
Right. And we have that. We have software developers in Ukraine and in Israel, and we're in the US, and so we have that situation too. And I think that it's a balance. I think the first thing is, if those people who are remote are working individually, you don't want to hire people who are really social and really team-oriented, because they'll be miserable. They'll be at home, working from their home office, and really looking for the opportunity to interact with others, and they're not going to have that, and so they're probably not going to stick around too long. So the first thing is that from a selection standpoint, you want to select people who are probably in line with being able to work in that type of environment. The second is, in terms of making people feel like they're part of a team, you want to make sure that you have those regular check-ins. Whether it's once a week or twice a week, maybe you have a video call, and you have everyone on the team on it together. And it's also important for people to get together on a regular basis. So even if you have a remote team, there's value in flying them to get together once or twice a year to the extent that you can afford it and be able to do that. There's value in having conferences like this, where we all get together, and it's different than if we had tried to interact remotely. And so I think that on the front end, you want to select for people who are going to do well and be flexible enough to be in that type of environment. And then the second is that you want to have strategies to maintain communication, and then to the extent that you can, get everyone together and to do it at a regular interval, so that they have that anticipation around knowing that it's coming, and it becomes a part of who they are, and it becomes a part of the role that they have. Anybody else? Sure.
How much does it cost and why so expensive?
How do you know it's so expensive? That's a very judgmental question. You know it's so expensive before you ask how much it costs. And it's free for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what we do, we price relative to volume. So we get a feel for how large a client is likely to be, and we're looking at the number of hires that they typically make. In the U.S., it'll cost generally a few $100s per hire. For an entry-level role, it'll be less than $100. And if someone's making in the U.S., we'll call it $10 an hour for a service-oriented role, we're talking about a day worth of what you might pay them. So the proposition, or 2 days. So the proposition is for a day or two worth of what you're going to pay someone, we can help you hire someone who's going to be better, more productive, turnover less often, you can do it faster and less expensively. But we've been able to show an ability to reduce turnover by about 20 to 30%. And generally that would provide sort of a 10 times return on investment. So hopefully it's not too expensive. And then you can try it out for 90 days. You don't like it, we give you your money back. So we make it easy.
But all is made automatically through the web, right?
Yeah,
You're not meeting people.
everything we do is over the web. We do have some coaching, so for executive level roles, someone might get on the phone and coach someone, and we're involved with our employers, in some cases with those check-ins at a regular interval.
Yeah.
But everything is designed to be automated, it's all over the web, and then we're aggregating that data and using it to improve performance over time. Okay, thank you all for allowing me to be here.
Would it be possible to get the slides?
Yes, so I will. I'll be in touch with everyone who organized it. But my email address is just michael.novack, Novack, at kiosite.com. You're all welcome to email me. I'm happy to email you the slides. If you have situations or anything we can help with. We're all friends now, so to the extent that we can help one another, we should do that. And so you can email me anytime, and I'm happy to introduce you to others in the field and be helpful in any way I can.
Thank you.
Thank you.